Hey, thank you for joining today's session. So we've come to our third tutorial for our Unit 9, Statistical Analysis for Datasets, for analyzing datasets. And in our previous tutorial, we covered understanding the principle for analyzing datasets. We looked into understand the principles of descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analysis. So in today's session, we're now going to carry out a simple statistic analysis using spreadsheet functionalities. So for this tutorial, we will cover 3 major learning outcomes, and we will also have a merit distinction. So by looking into our indicative content, our with spreadsheet such as Microsoft Excel and Google Sheet, this always going to provide functionality to conduct much more simpler statistical analysis, and this could now help us when it comes to looking into data visualization. So these tools are always user-friendly and they are widely accessible. So we know these are applications that are available for any sort of data analyst. So we will look into a guide which is going to outline the steps to perform basic statistics analysis using spreadsheet functionalities. So these functions that we're now going to cover when it comes to descriptive statistics for our mean, we're now looking into average, which is used to calculate the average of set numbers, median, which is used for finding the middle value in a set number, mode, which it is now used to identify the most frequent occurring value, and standard deviation, where we know this is used to measure the description of data points from the mean. Variation, this is now used to calculate the average square deviation from the mean. And minimum and maximum is used to find the smallest and largest value in the data set. When it comes to frequency distribution, this now is going to generate a frequency distribution counting the occurrences of values with a specific range. Pivot table, this is going to summarize data by categorizing, providing counts, sum, and averages. Correlation and aggregation analysis. So with a correlation coefficient, we're now going to measure the linear relationship between variables. With a simple linear regression, we're now going to use a scatter plot with a trend line to visualize the regression line. Hypothesis thesis, as we've seen from a previous tutorial, we have t-test on chi-square test, where with the first one, we now use it to compare the means of two groups to determine if the statistical difference. While the second one, we're now going to test the independence between categorical variables. So here we have covered the function. So we now have a step-by-step guide to simple statistical analysis. We have to have the ability to input the data. We now have to enter our values into spreadsheet, calculate this descriptive statistics. So we're now going to apply our functions. in order for us to have our calculation, and create a frequency table. So we're now going to define the bin and use our functions. Or alternatively, we could use a pivot table to summarize our categorical data. Also, we have to perform correlation analysis, where with this function, we now calculate the correlation coefficient between two variables. Then we will also conduct the regression analysis, where we're going to calculate the slope and intercept using the appropriate function. Hypothesis thesis. We will now be using this for comparing the mean. Now for categorical data independence. So here are some examples of analysis sales data, where we now have to input data, enter monthly sales data for two products in column A and column B. We now have to describe our statistics. Also, we have to look into frequency table, correlation analysis, and regression analysis to determine the relationship between adverse spend, and hypothesis testing, where we're now going to compare average sales before and after making campaign. So as you can see, spreadsheet tools like Excel, Google Sheet will now provide a wide range of functions for now conducting simple statistical analysis. Okay, now we're now going to look into how to construct a pivot table. So by creating this table in Excel, we now involve several steps, which each of them will now contribute into organize our insightful data summary. So we'll now have a step-by-step, and we're now required to prepare our data, where we now ensure that we have a range that has unique headers and contains no blank rows or columns. So we now created our initial table. Now have to insert our pivot table. So we now use the functions to select the entire data range. Then we're now going to insert tab on the ribbon, and we now also select on pivot table in order for us to create our first table. Step 2, we're now going to be dragging field to column and rows, filtering column and rows. So our initial step is to pivot the table field. So on the row, on the new worksheet, we'll now see our pivot table field listed on the right. We're now going to be adding this field by dragging the product to the row area. Also, we'll be now dragging the region to the column area and drag the cells into the values area. Once we've done that, we can now filter the data by dragging the fields into our filter area. By using filtering, we'll now use this drop-down arrow next to the row label and column to filter specific product or regions. Step 3, we now value field settings, summarization option, and number format. So with the summarization option in the value area, we now click the drop-down arrow next to sum of cells. Select the value field and choose a summarization. Number format, this is a value field in the settings dialog box where we can now click on the number format, choose the desired format, and select OK. Step 4, we're now going to sort our value grouping columns and row. By sort value, we now click on our drop down arrow next to the row label or column label, and we now have to sort alphabetically, which is from A to Z. Grouping, right click on the value, we can now group them. Step 5, dragging filters. Apply filter S. We can now drag fields and use the drop down arrow in the filter area to apply specific filter for our data. Step 6, we'll now show values. By showing the values, we'll now click on the drop down arrow next to the field. Select show value as. We now also have the option to choose such as a percentage of grand total or a percentage of a column, also percentage of total row. Step 7, we now have functions, get pivot data, whereby using this function, we can now retrieve pivot data. So this function will retrieve specific data from our pivot table, ensuring that the report stays dynamic even if the pivot table is updated. So here's an example of our function get pivot data. So we can now see that constructing a pivot table in Excel will now involve selecting data range, dragging fields into appropriate areas, setting fields option, sorting, grouping, filtering, and also using the get pivot data function. So now we're going to select and use a range of spreadsheet functions as part of our analysis. So here's an example of our date function. So we can use now, which returns the current data and time. Today, we now return the current date. Date is going to is going to create a date from the specific year, month, and day. Year FRAC is going to return a function of the year between two dates. Date is going to return the day of the month from the date. Month returns the month from a day. Year will now return the year from a day. Hour is going to return an hour from a time. Minute is going to return a minute from time. Second will now return second from time. And time is going to create a time from a specific hour, minute, or second. So subtracting two dates. Conditional function with if we're now going to return a Boolean function where we're now checking if the condition is true or false. And we're now going to return true if both conditions are true, or is going to check to return if at least one of the conditions is met. Not is going to return true if both conditions . We have lookup functions, so we have two of them, VLOOK and HLOOK. Well, with the first one, if we're going, as you can see from the example, if we look for Apple, the first column, and return the corresponding value from the second column. With the second one, we're now going to look for cells in the first row and return the corresponding value from the second row. Match will now return the position of Apple within the range. Index is going to return the value from the third row and the second column in the range. Choose will now return the second value, as you can see for an example. Indirect will now return a value in the cell A1. Information functions. These are going to return true if there is an error, and also they're going to return true if A1 is a number, for example, of E is a number. Statistics summarization function, such as count. This will now count the number of numeric values. Count A, which counts the number of non-empty cells. Count if, this counts the number of cells greater than 10. And count if S counts the number of cells meeting multiple criteria. With sum, we're now going to add up the values in the range. Sum if is going to sum the values greater than 10. Sum if S will now sum the values meeting multiple criteria. Sum product multiplies corresponding value and return the sum. Mode will now return the most frequent occurring value. Rank will return the rank of number within a range. Average will now calculate the average of a range. Description will now calculate the average value greater than 10. Average, if we now look into the average is the value meeting multiple criteria. Mean will now find the mean A will now find the smallest value, treating true as the first as 1 and false as 0. Mean if will now find value. Max A, we're now going to find the largest value, treating true as 1 and false as 0. Max if will now find the largest value less than 10. And with the large, we're now going to return the third value, the third largest value. Small will now return the third smallest value. So when it comes to mathematical functions, we now have ABS, which we're now going to return the absolute value. RA and D, which return a random number between 0 and 1. And we have rand between, which return a random number between specific limits. The round, we're now going to round the number to a specific digit. Round up, we now round a number up to a specific digit. And round down, we're going to round the number down to a specific digit. With int, now I'm going to round the number down to the nearest integer. Ceiling, we're going to round the number up to the nearest multiple of significance. Floor, we're going to round the number down to the nearest multiple. So by using a wide range of spreadsheets, now we're going to explain how lookup functions are used to select data from the table. So lookup functions, Microsoft Excel and Google Sheet. These again are going to allow users to search for specific data in a table or range or return corresponding values from another column to row. So the common lookup functions are VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, match, index, choose, indirect, and VLOOKUPs. So we will now have a use case for each of them. So for VLOOKUP, example says, suppose you have a table of product and price in column and prices in column A and B. To find the price of Apple, you should now use our Excel. We now copy the function, and this is going to return the value from the second column in the same row. So the range lookup argument will now specify whether you want the exact match, false, or an approximate match, which is true. Each lookup, our use case, and the first row and price is the second row. To find the price of Apple, you will now use this function, where with HLOOKUP, we now search for Apple in the first row of the range and A1 and return the value from the second row in the same column. So the limitations for this is that it can only search for the first row, and is similar to a VLOOK. To return the first match found and is a very case insensitive match. So this function is used to find the position of Apple in the range A1. So this is how the function would look like. So the match type argument will now specify whether to find an extract match 0, the largest value less than or equal to the lookup value of 1, or the smallest value which is greater than or equal to the lookup value. With index, we're now going to find the value in the third row and second column of the range A1. Index is now going to return the value of a cell in a specific row and column of a range. Combining index and match, so to find the price of Apple, we'll now be using this function. And with this match will now find the row number for Apple and index return. Index return the value from the corresponding row in the second column. Choose. This will now allow to select the second value from a list. So we'll be using this function. This will now return the value based on the index number provided. As you can see in the example, this will now going to return banana. Indirect, this will now refer to the value in the cell A1, which is indirectly, and the function for it with indirect, the value form of the cell will now refer to specific, will now be a reference specified as a text string, and this will now allow dynamic referencing of a cell. So here's a table summary of what we've covered. So as you can see, lookup function, very powerful tools, which will now allow to select and retrieve data from tables and spreadsheets. We've now come to a merit activity, where we're now going to analyze the use of conditional statistic summarization function. So with conditional statistic summarization function in spreadsheet, we can now, such as Excel and Google Sheet, this can now allow us users to calculate statistics based on specified criteria. So here are some of the statistics functions, such as count if and count if s, sum if and sum if s. Then we have average if and average if s, mean if and mean if x, and large and small conditions. With count if and count if s, this will now going to count the numbers of cells in the range A1 that are larger than 10. So an example, we're counting the numbers of cells transaction will now going to be exceeding a certain value. With count if s, we're now going to count the numbers of cells that meet the multiple criteria across different ranges. We're now going to count in the number of products sold in a specific price range and within a certain date range. Analysis. This will now allow for detailed data segmentation, which is now going to facilitate quick identification of data point and meet specific condition. The limitation for analysis are going to be performance, which might degrade with very large data sets. Sum if and sum if s. This is now going to be the sum of values in B1 where the corresponding value in A1 is greater than 10. With sum if s, we have a use case where this can be used when calculating total sales for specific region and within a popular sales range. Benefits of this, we're now going to support multiple conditions, enhance analytical precisions, and these are also useful for financial analysis such as budgeting and forecasting. The limitation that comes with it is that they will now have complex criteria setup, which can be error prone. Average if and average if s. The first one, we'll now use it to calculate the average of values in B1 where corresponding values in A1 are greater than 10. This allows us on determining the average sales amount for higher value transactions. With the average get IFAs, this will now calculate average of values in B1, where the corresponding value in A1 are greater than 10 and C1 are both. Use case for this, we're now going to be finding the average sales for specific region and sales range. What are the benefits? This allows for multiple criteria averaging, useful in performance analysis, and has the ability to generate focused insight from complex data. The limitation for this is that we now have performance can be impacted with extensive criteria on large data sets. Min if and max if. The first one, we now find the minimum value in B1, where A1 is greater than 10 and C1 is lower. The max one, we now find the maximum value in B1, where A1 is greater than 10 and C1 is lower. Benefit is that we now have, it is now useful for performance benchmarking and outlier detection. This is also going to help in setting realistic targets based on our historical data. What are the limitations that we're going to find is that it is limited for more recent version of Excel. Large and small with conditions, where these are now going to be used to finding the top 3 source figures. So conditional use for this is that we're now going to combine with if or array formulas to apply conditions. What are the benefit of this? We're now going to identify top and bottom performance. And the limitation is that we now have complex array formulas, which can be difficult to manage. Here's a summary table. So as you can see, conditional statistics summarization functions, spreadsheet, are now a very powerful tool for extracting meaningful insight from our data. So the functions that we covered, such as count if, sum if, and average if, will now enable detailed targeted analysis by applying specific criteria, where these functions are also essential for many tasks, such as financial analysis, performance benchmarking, and targeted data analysis. So this was everything for today's session. Is there any question for me?
Thanks, Victor. Nope, that was all, very clear, very similar stuff I've covered in previous qualifications and stuff, and yes, just stuff I'm aware of. So no, that was all really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so if that's everything, I will end today's session, and we'll have a minute break and start our new session, which is our assignment discussion.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks, Victor. See you in 5 minutes.
See you. Okay.